The start of a new year is a guaranteed path to new rumors, or more specifically, in today's case, the return of old rumors. A Nintendo Switch Pro model has been the assumed answer to the next generation of consoles coming from PlayStation and Xbox. The question I want to discuss today is, how can Nintendo realistically maximize the potential of a hardware upgrade to answer to these next generation consoles, especially without alienating any current Nintendo Switch or Nintendo Switch Lite owners? Let's talk about it. Hey, quick note before we really get started, and no, this doesn't pertain to the Discord server that we have and that you can join by clicking the link in the pinned comment down below. It instead is about our weekly podcast that you can subscribe and listen to by clicking the links in the description and in the pinned comment down below. On this podcast every week, we cover the latest Nintendo news and we respond to comments from our community on videos like this and questions from the question and answer segment. I think if you enjoy these videos and enjoy responding to these videos in the comments down below, you would probably like hearing our responses to your response in those podcasts, so be sure to check those out on your service of choice. There's actually no need to segue into the video either, since that's actually directly related to the subject at hand. On last week's episode of Directly to You, we talked about the likelihood of a Switch Pro and how something like it could position Nintendo to continue their dominance as the other console manufacturers enter the next generation. Since then, I've given even more thought into this, and now I want to present those more fleshed out thoughts here. So let's do just that, starting with what I think Switch Pro could realistically be first. To be clear, I don't think Switch Pro will be reaching any of the heights of 2020's next-gen consoles. I don't even think it'll directly compete with the Pro versions of Sony or Microsoft's current-gen consoles. What I do think Switch Pro could potentially do is take Switch closer to where the original PS4 and Xbox One are in power. Maybe even a bit more powerful if Nintendo's past is consistent with their future. I think we could be looking at more 1080p 60 frames per second games coming to Switch both retroactively through patches and in the future with new releases. I think we could even see some devs release games that are technically 4K 30 frames per second as publicity stunts. And I could see Nintendo going in a few potential different directions to accomplish this. They could go the route of a dedicated home console version to live side by side with Switch Lite as their dedicated handheld and dedicated console duo, which I think would be dumb and counter to the progress they've made toward a defined and consistent place in the market, but it wouldn't be the first time they zagged where I thought they would zig. So anything's possible, I guess. That said, the current rumor going around is that the Switch will have a magnesium alloy body, and I don't think they'd care to make that sort of change if it weren't going to be a handheld device of some kind. So I doubt it'll be a dedicated home console, but for the sake of the video, let's assume for whatever reason they'd change the console's material despite a dedicated console not really needing something like that. A docked mode only Switch could be a lot more powerful relative to the price point, since it wouldn't have the handheld mode bottleneck holding it back. Additionally, this may be some people's dream scenario, but it would easily be the least desired option for me. My favorite aspect of Switch is its hybrid nature. Alternatively, they could go with another Switch Lite handheld only situation, but I think that's even less likely if the aim is performance, since the main performance bottleneck, as I mentioned, of the current Switch is its handheld mode. You couldn't really put the power of a PlayStation 4 level console in the palm of people's hands without heat becoming an issue. So I think the best bet is yet another hybrid console. Okay, now that we've established what I think this next Switch iteration will be, let's look at some of the reasons people may advise against Nintendo releasing a Nintendo Switch Pro, followed by some of the reasons why I think those reasons to not buy something like this are kind of unwarranted. The first most obvious reason to avoid releasing a Switch Pro has to be the potential for a negative reaction from current Nintendo Switch and maybe even Nintendo Switch Lite owners. After all, Switch has nearly 50 million people that may be getting walled off from content they assumed they would be able to play on the console they bought. The games industry has conditioned consumers to assume they'd be future-proof for a good 4 to 5 years before it is rendered obsolete by a successor, and assuming the Switch Pro invalidates the current lineup of consoles, which, spoilers for later in the video, I don't think it will, that wouldn't make good on that perceived promise. I think if handled poorly, this could definitely lose Nintendo some goodwill. But given their history of lateral hardware revisions and hardware upgrades, then dropping the ball in this regard is pretty unlikely. Nintendo knows more than anyone that releasing a console that invalidates their current stable of hardware isn't something to take lightly. Hell, they still won't put a definitive end to the 3DS's life cycle. There's no way they will put out a console that would kill the Switch family as we know it anytime soon. That said, it could very well replace the current models in the Switch family, as lower price SKUs are usually overlooked by most Nintendo fans, especially in the West. If there's enough of an upgrade to the specs that developers are creating content with compelling reasons to make the jump, then people won't even consider the cheaper models moving forward. This is kind of demonstrated already with the divide in Switch Lite and OG Switch sales. The bulk of consumers are still opting to buy the main Nintendo Switch despite having a cheaper option, and that's because when presented with enough extra features with a reasonable enough gap in price, the higher priced item always wins out. If you can afford it, why not spend $100 extra on the ability to dock it and play on TV, or even the option to easily play with someone else, or hand it to a couple of kids to keep them entertained during a trip or something. I think a similar mindset may be had by people who'd prefer to play some of the latest games on Switch with less compromises. That said, I don't think the obsolescence of the current Switch line would be a real risk. The people that really care about higher specs in their gaming hardware didn't exactly bet the bank on the current Switch, meaning I think current Switch owners either would accept having a less powerful Switch within reason, which I'll get to, and if anything would see the release of a Switch Pro as a good thing and likely double dip or sell their current Switch to pay for the Pro model. However, there will be a segment of the audience that will choose not to upgrade and will feel slighted by whatever improvements everybody else is enjoying with these console upgrades. I know this because whenever there's a video that I talk about the latest version of a Switch game, there will be people that bemoan the lack of a 3DS version. How can Nintendo hope to satiate this audience? Well, the short and easy answer would be to ignore them. As time goes on, consumers that hold on to previous generations of hardware have a smaller and smaller impact on overall revenue, so not spending the money and bandwidth to satiate them likely wouldn't move the needle one way or the other. But I do think there's a solution for the people that don't want to pay the money to upgrade, but still would like the benefits of that very upgrade. And the people that listen to that podcast I mentioned have an idea of where my head's at on this: cloud gaming. In an interview with Japanese publication Nikkei, Nintendo president Shuntaro Furukawa has made it pretty clear that he thinks cloud gaming has some time before it appeals to the market at large. But I don't think that in any way is his way of saying they don't think it's worth pursuing in the near future. I think cloud gaming in its current form is best utilized as a supplemental addition to their release plans. I think making potential Switch Pro only games playable on the existing Switch family of consoles through cloud gaming is the best solution, and thanks to the fact that Nintendo is already a company in the business of profiting directly off their hardware, they also are a company in the business of retaining customers in hopes that they will eventually buy into next-gen hardware when that time comes. So I do think there's a chance of Nintendo offering people a few options with games in the cloud, unlike Google does with Stadia. First, and what I feel is the most likely option, is giving people access to the dedicated version of the cloud-based game that they buy in the eShop when they eventually do buy a console that can run it natively. Alternatively, they could do what Stadia should have done and provide a subscription option for cloud-based games, so people can just play through the games they don't care to own and leave it at that. That said, this is assuming Nintendo will even take advantage of the increased power in a potential Switch Pro for anything more than improving game performance rather than making a ton of new exclusive content. If anything, the bulk of Switch Pro exclusive games would likely come from third parties that don't have the resources to optimize their games to run well on the base Switch and Switch Lite, but would still like to have access to an audience of players that prefer to play games on Nintendo platforms or just generally on the go. I think there's a contingent of pundits that believe third-party support will dry up without it, but honestly, I think this is only a piece of what will sustain Nintendo going forward. Obviously, their games will sustain them regardless of what they do, but it's also important to note that the availability of 64GB Switch carts will entice some devs, and the falling prices of carts below 64GB will likely entice even more. That said, I think there's a decent chance that we will see a new Switch model of some sort. Those are my thoughts. What do you think about the viability of a Switch Pro model of some sort coming out in 2020. Would you buy something like that? And if so, do you already have a Switch, or have you been waiting for a Pro model to come out before you jump in? Also, what's the most that you would pay for something like this? Let me know that and more in the comments down below. Or you can tweet your thoughts at me or leave them in our Discord. You have a lot of options here. If you enjoyed this video, do me a favor and share it with a friend that you think would enjoy it as well. And most importantly, if you haven't already, subscribe and ring the bell for more videos like this every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. If you really enjoy our content, maybe consider clicking the join button for exclusive emotes, gaming time with us, free Switch keys from time to time, access to our supporters only Discord, because January is here. January is rough for YouTubers. Ask them. Okay, that's it for me. See you next week.